Today we continue our series out of Joshua, Strong and Courageous, as we explore the incredible lessons God has for us in the life of Joshua and the travels of the Israelites. Last week we celebrated one of the most famous victories from the Bible, the fall of Jericho. It was a moment of triumph, a display of God's power and faithfulness as the Israelites obeyed his unconventional instruction and watched the walls come tumbling down. But today we shift our focus to a much more challenging chapter in the story of the Israelites, a chapter not of victory, but of defeat. In Joshua 7, we find the Israelites experiencing a crushing setback. Fresh off their triumph at Jericho, they approach the small city of Ai with confidence, only to suffer a crushing defeat. 36 men lose their lives. The army flees in fear, and Joshua himself falls to the ground in anguish and despair, crying out to God. It's a moment that could have defined them, but by God's grace, it becomes a turning point instead. A story of recovery, redemption, and moving forward. To bridge the gap between these two moments, let's consider what happened at Jericho. After Jericho, God had commanded the Israelites to devote everything in Jericho to him. The silver, gold, bronze, and iron were to go into the Lord's treasury, and everything else was to be destroyed. It was a clear command. This was holy ground. And the victory at Jericho was not for personal gain, but for God's glory. While the nation celebrated, one man chose to disobey. Achan, from the tribe of Judah, took some of the devoted things and hid them in his tent. His actions, done in secret, became the root of Israel's next great challenge. When the Israelites set their sights on Ai, they assumed another easy victory was at hand. Ai was a much smaller city and less fortified than Jericho. Confident in their strength, they sent only a fraction of their army. But what they didn't realize was that while about Achan's hidden sin that had broken their covenant with God, without God's blessing, their strength meant absolutely nothing. The small city of Ai routed the Israelites, and the nation was left shaken, fearful, and confused that day. Let me ask you this. Have you ever experienced a moment like that in your life? A moment where you went from feeling on top of the world to wondering how it all fell apart. Maybe it was a career setback, a job you thought was secure, a promotion you thought you had earned, a dream you poured your heart into only to see it crumble. Or perhaps it was a relationship. One you worked hard to build that broke under the strain of unmet expectations or unresolved conflict. Maybe it was a moral failure, a decision you deeply regret, a sin you thought you had conquered, but that came back to haunt you. Whatever it was, you know what it feels like to be blindsided by failure. Let's be honest. Failure has a way of hitting us where it hurts the most, doesn't it? It shakes our confidence. It makes us question our abilities, our decisions, and sometimes even our self-worth. It whispers things like, "You're not good enough. You'll never recover from this. God can't use someone like you." The church, the story of Joshua and the Israelites at Ai reminds us of something powerful. Failure does not have to be the end of the story. Our God is a God of redemption. He doesn't leave us in our brokenness.
Yep.
He meets us there, exposes what needs to change, and offers us a way forward. Whether your failure stems from hidden sin, poor judgment, weakness of character, or simply being human, God has a plan to redeem. The story of I shows us how to recover from failure without letting that failure define us. It teaches us how to examine the roots of our setbacks, to confront what needs to be confronted, and to move forward with confidence in God's grace. Today we're going to unpack the lessons that we get from Joshua and how they apply to our lives. So if you've ever felt the sting of failure, if you've ever wondered how to get back up when life has knocked you down, this is the message for you. Let's look at Joshua 7 and discover how God can take even our lowest moments and use them to bring about his greatest purposes. So turn with me. We'll begin by reading Joshua 7, verses 1 through 13 in the Pew Bible in front of you. I believe it starts on page 215, and as always, the words will be on the screen behind me. It reads, "But the Israelites were unfaithful in regard to the devoted David. Achan, son of Carmi, the son of Zimri, the son of Zerah, the tribe of Judah, took some of them. So the Lord's anger burned against Israel. Now Joshua sent some men from Jericho to Ai, which is near Bethlehem, to the east of Bethel, and told them, 'Go out and spy out the region.' So the men went up and spied out Ai, and when they returned to Joshua, they said, 'Not all the army will have to go up against Ai. Send 2,000 or 3,000 men to take it, and do not weary the whole army, for only a few people live there.' So about 3,000 went up, but they were routed by the men of Ai, who killed about 36 of them. They chased the Israelites from the city gate as far as the stone quarries and struck them down on the slopes. At this, the hearts of the people melted in fear and became like water. Then Joshua tore his clothes and fell face down to the ground before the ark of the Lord, remaining there till evening, and the elders of Israel did the same and sprinkled dust on their heads. And Joshua said, 'Alas, Sovereign Lord, why did you ever bring this people to cross the Jordan to deliver us into the hands of the Amorites to destroy us? If only we had been content to stay on the other side of the Jordan. Pardon your servant, Lord. What can I say now that Israel has been looted by its enemies? The Canaanites and the other people of the country will hear about this, and they will surround us and wipe out our name from the earth. What then will you do for your great name?' And the Lord said to Joshua, 'Stand up! What are you doing face down? Israel has sinned. They have violated my covenant, which I commanded them to keep. They have taken some of the devoted things. They have stolen. They have lied. They have put them with their possessions. That is why the Israelites cannot stand against their enemies. They turn their backs and run because they have been made liable to destruction. I will not be with you anymore unless you destroy whatever among you is devoted to destruction. Go consecrate the people. Tell them, consecrate yourselves in preparation for tomorrow, for this is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says. There are devoted things among you, Israel. You cannot stand against your enemies until you remove them.'" The story we just read from Joshua 7 is one of the most sobering moments in Israel's journey to claim the promised land. After the triumph of Jericho, a victory so extraordinary that only God could have orchestrated it, the Israelites faced an unexpected defeat at Ai. It's a moment of humiliation, confusion, and heartbreak, not just for Joshua, but for the entire nation. And this text gives us insight into what happens when this disobedience, poor judgment, and misplaced confidence creep into our lives. Notice how the story begins. But the Israelites were unfaithful in regard to the devoted thing. The simple word unfaithful sets the tone for everything that follows. It wasn't just Achan's sin. The text emphasized that this unfaithfulness impacted the entire community. This reminds us that we don't live in isolation. Our choices, good or bad, ripple outward, affecting everyone around us. From there, we see Joshua sending men to scout out Ai. And the spies come back with what seems like a reasonable plan. Don't send out the whole army. Ai is small. 2,000 or 3,000 men will be enough. On the surface, this makes sense. Ai was indeed much smaller than Jericho, but here's what's missing. Nowhere do you see Joshua or the Israelites consulting God. There's no mention of prayer, no seeking of divine guidance. It's as if the victory in Jericho gave them a false sense of security. They assumed that they could handle the battle on their own. And that overconfidence leads to disaster. The small army sent to Ai is routed, and 36 men lost their lives. That number may seem small compared to the size of Israel's army, but for people who had just witnessed God's miraculous power at Jericho, it was devastating. The text says the hearts of the people melted in fear and became like water. The same people who had marched around Jericho with bold faith are now paralyzed by fear. Joshua's response is one of raw honesty. He falls face down before the ark of the Lord, crying out in anguish. He doesn't sugarcoat his emotions or try to put on a brave face. He asks the questions that many of us ask when we face failure. Why, Lord? Why did this happen to me? What are we supposed to do now? God's response is striking. Stand up! What are you doing down on your face? Israel has sinned. God doesn't rebuke Joshua for asking questions, but he does redirect him. The defeat wasn't a random event. It had a root cause, unfaithfulness in the camp. And until that unfaithfulness was addressed, the Israelites wouldn't be able to move forward. Church, this passage offers us so much to consider. Like the Israelites, we've all faced moments of defeat, right? Moments where we've been brought low by failure. Maybe it was hidden sin like Achan. Maybe it was poor judgment like the decision to underestimate Ai. Or maybe it was something entirely beyond your control. Yet it still left you broken and confused. Whatever the cause, failure has a way of bringing us to our knees. But here's the good news. Here's the good news. God does not leave us in our failure. He meets us there, exposes what needs to be exposed, and then offers a way forward. That's what we're going to talk about today. How to recognize the root of failure. How to avoid letting it define us, and how to move forward with confidence in God's grace. Let's start with that first step. Point one. Recognize the root of failure. The first step in recovering from failure is to recognize its root. In the case of the Israelites' defeat at Ai, the root cause was disobedience. Achan's decision to take what had been devoted to the Lord. This act of hidden rebellion disrupted God and the people, leaving them vulnerable. The defeat wasn't random, it was a result of a deeper issue that needed to be addressed. Well, let's broaden the principle. Because not all failure stems from hidden sin, does it? Sometimes the root of failure can be poor judgment, misplaced priorities, overconfidence, or even fear. Whatever the cause, failure invites us to pause, reflect, and ask the hard question, what is the root of this setback? For the Israelites, the failure at I revealed a collective problem, not just an individual one. Achan's sin may have been hidden, but its consequences rippled outwards, affecting the entire community. That's a sobering reminder for us. Our actions, whether we think they're private or not, affect those around us. In our families, workplaces, and church, one person's choices can have far-reaching effects. Sin, no matter how hidden, always leaves collateral damage. It's not just about sin. Maybe your failure wasn't a moral failing, but the result of poor judgment. A decision made without seeking God's guidance. That's what we see in Joshua's leadership here. Before the battle at Ai, there's no record of him consulting God. At Jericho, Joshua followed God's instructions to the letter. But at Ai, he relied on the advice of his spies and his own understanding. And isn't that something we all do? I mean, when things seem straightforward, we rely on ourselves, forgetting to seek God's wisdom. Church, failure isn't always an error. It can be a teacher as well. It's an opportunity to step back, evaluate, and let God reveal what went wrong. David prayed in Psalm 139, verses 23 and 24, "Search me, God, and know my heart. Test me and know my anxious thoughts. See if there is any offensive way in me and lead me in the way everlasting." That's a prayer we all need to pray when we face failure. Maybe the root of your failure is hidden sin like Achan. Maybe it's misplaced confidence like Joshua's, or maybe it's something else entirely, a moment of weakness, fear, or distraction. Whatever it is, God's desire is not to shame you, but to redeem you. He exposes the root of failure not to condemn you, but to heal you. So don't ignore the root. Don't brush off failure as random or meaningless. Ask God to search your heart, reveal what needs to change, and lead you forward. Because it's only when we confront the root of failure that we can begin to recover and move toward the victory God has for us. Point 2, don't let failure define you. One of the greatest dangers of failure is the temptation to let it define us. After their defeat at Ai, the Israelites could have given up entirely, right? They could have said, we're not strong enough. Who are we kidding? We're not capable. Let's just go back to the wilderness. Failure has a way of whispering lies like that into our hearts. You're not good enough. You'll never recover from this. You might as well give up. But church, hear me. Hear me now. Failure does not have to define you. Think about Peter, one of Jesus' closest disciples. Peter was bold and passionate and outspoken, but when Jesus was arrested, Peter denied him not once, not twice, but 3 times. It was a devastating failure, one that could have paralyzed Peter with shame, and yet that failure did not define him. After his resurrection, Jesus met Peter on the shores of Galilee, restoring him with the words, "Feed my sheep." Peter's failure became part of his story, but it didn't become the end of his story. With God's grace, Peter went on to become one of the foundational leaders of the early church. And church, the same is true for us. Proverbs 24:16 reminds us, though the righteous fall 7 times, they rise again. Failure is not the final word. God is. If you've fallen, God's call to you is to rise again. Maybe you've made a mistake in your marriage. or your parenting. Maybe you stumbled in your faith, made a bad decision at work, or just fallen short of the person you want to be. Whatever it is, God's grace is greater than your failure. But here's the key. You have to allow God to write the next chapter. Too often we get stuck in that moment of failure, replaying it in our minds, letting it define our identity. But your identity is not found in your mistakes. Your identity is found in Jesus Christ. You are a child of God, redeemed, forgiven, and called according to His purpose. That is who you are this morning. Don't forget that. The Israelites didn't let their defeated eyes define them. Once they dealt with the sin in their camp, they got back up, trusted God, and moved forward, and so can you. Don't let failure be the end of your story. Let God redeem it, use it, and turn it into something beautiful for His glory. You are, I'm telling you, you are far more than your worst moment. You are who God says you are. So rise up and let Him lead you forward. Point 3. Move forward with confidence in God's grace. After dealing with the sin in their camp, the Israelites didn't stay stuck in shame. They moved forward, following God's instructions to conquer Ai. This time, they did so with humility, obedience, and reliance on God's strength. When you face failure, the way forward is not through self-pity or self-reliance. It's through confidence in God's grace. Isaiah 41:10 reminds us. So do not fear, for I am with you. Do not be dismayed, for I am your God. I will strengthen and help you. I will uphold you with my righteous right hand. Moving forward means trusting that God can take your failure and use it for His glory. Even your failures can become part of God's redemptive plan. So how do we move forward? Well, first, you repent where repentance is needed. You learn from what went wrong, and then you take the next step in faith, trusting that God's grace is sufficient for you. Church, failure is not the end of your story. It wasn't the end for the Israelites. It wasn't the end for Peter, and it doesn't have to be the end for you. No matter how great the setback, no matter how deep the regret, God's grace is greater. He specializes in redemption, in taking what is broken and making it whole, and turning ashes into beauty. Here's the question. Will you let Him? Will you let Him take your failure and write that next chapter? Will you trust Him enough to rise again? Because here's the truth. Here's the truth. The enemy wants you to stay down. He wants you to wallow in shame, to replay your mistakes over and over, to believe the lie that God can't use you anymore. But God's voice says, stand up. I'm not finished with you yet. The Israelites could have stayed stuck in their defeat at Ai, but they didn't. They confronted the root of their failure, they dealt with it, and they moved forward with God's strength. And God gave them the victory. He can do the same for you. Whatever the failure you're facing, bring it to Him. Lay it at His feet. Let Him redeem it. This is your moment. Don't let failure define you. Let God define you. Trust Him to take your lowest moments and use them for His greatest purposes. Stand up, church, because God is not done with you yet. The victory is still ahead. Will you step into it this morning? Carry your 3 questions for the week. Open your eyes this week and take a good look around you, church. Who in your world has fallen and not managed to find their feet again? Who do you know that needs a hand? Who among you needs help standing back up? This is your mission this week. Help restore someone. Be blessed. Be a blessing.